Somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, a human woke up and something was wrong. Their head was pounding, their body was burning, every joint ached in a way it never had before. They couldn't stand up properly, they couldn't hunt, they couldn't carry anything. They just lay there on the ground, shaking, while the world kept moving around them. And the people around them had absolutely no idea what was happening. No doctor, no diagnosis, no medicine, no concept of germs, viruses, bacteria, or infection. Just a person on the ground who was fine yesterday and wasn't fine today, and nobody knew why. What happened next would set the course of everything that came after. Every hospital, every pharmaceutical company, every surgery, every vaccine, every time you've ever swallowed a pill, or sat in a waiting room, or trusted a stranger in a white coat to fix something broken inside you, it all traces back to that moment. One sick human, and a group of people who had to decide what to do about it. Let's start with what they were actually dealing with, because the first illness to hit early humans wasn't a cold, it wasn't a stomach bug. The diseases that devastated early human populations were almost certainly parasitic infections, worms, flukes, protozoa, organisms that had been evolving alongside mammals for hundreds of millions of years before we even existed. They were already in the water, already in the meat, already in the soil. The moment the first human crouched down to drink from a river or ate an animal that hadn't been cooked properly, the clock started ticking. And here's what makes that terrifying. These infections don't announce themselves immediately. A parasitic worm can live inside a human body for weeks before symptoms appear. So the first sick human had no way of connecting what they ate 3 weeks ago to what was happening to their body right now. The cause and the effect were completely invisible. To them, it would have looked like something had entered the person from outside, not a worm they couldn't see, something else, something with intent, something that chose this person. And that belief, that sickness was caused by an external force with a will of its own, became the foundation of the first medical system in human history. Anthropologists studying ancient burial sites and early human settlements have found evidence of what they call shamanic healing going back at least 30,000 years, possibly much further. The shaman was the first doctor, and their job wasn't to treat symptoms. It was to negotiate with the thing causing them, to perform rituals, chants, and ceremonies designed to drive the invading spirit out of the body. And here's the part that's easy to dismiss, but actually isn't. It worked, not because spirits are real, but because of something we now call the placebo effect, which is not a trick and not imaginary. It is a measurable, reproducible biological phenomenon where belief in a treatment triggers real physiological changes. Pain actually decreases, immune responses actually strengthen. Healing actually accelerates. When a shaman performed a healing ritual over a sick person, the sick person's stress response lowered, their cortisol dropped, their body stopped spending energy on fear and redirected it toward recovery. The ritual was medicine, just not in the way anyone understood at the time. But rituals alone couldn't handle everything, because at some point, an early human made a different kind of discovery. They noticed something. An animal that ate a certain plant seemed to recover from something it shouldn't have survived. Or a person who chewed a specific root felt their fever break faster. Or a poultice made from a particular leaf stopped a wound from festering. These observations didn't come from science. They came from desperation and pattern recognition stretched across thousands of years of watching and trying and failing and trying again. But they were real, and they worked. We know this because many of the plants used in ancient folk medicine have now been scientifically validated. Willow bark, which ancient Egyptians and Greeks used for pain and fever, contains salicin, the compound we synthesize into aspirin. Artemisia, used in Chinese medicine for thousands of years to treat fever, turned out to contain artemisinin, now one of the most effective antimalarial drugs on the planet. Honey, used to dress wounds in ancient Egypt, is genuinely antimicrobial. It actually kills bacteria. The first humans didn't know why these things worked, but they knew that they did, and they remembered, and they told the next generation, and that knowledge compounded across thousands of years into the first pharmacopoeias, the first medical texts, the first doctors. But none of that explains the most remarkable thing about how early humans responded to sickness. They stayed. Think about what it means for a group of hunter-gatherers to care for a sick member. You're a small band of maybe 20 to 50 people. Every single person needs to be functional for the group to survive. You need hunters, you need gatherers, you need people to carry things, build shelters, watch for predators, tend fires. A sick person contributes none of that. Worse, they slow everyone down. In purely practical terms, the rational move is to leave them behind. But they didn't. We know this because the archaeological record tells us so. The skeleton found at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the same site with the flower burial, included an individual scientist called Shanidar I. He was a Neanderthal who had survived to roughly 40 years old, which was extremely old for that era. But here's what's extraordinary. He had a withered arm that had been amputated, or lost above the elbow. He was blind in one eye. He had severe arthritis throughout his body. He could not have hunted. He could not have gathered. He could not have contributed to the group in any of the ways that mattered for survival. And yet he lived to 40. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone kept him alive for years when there was no practical reason to do so. That is not an animal behavior. No other species does that consistently. Lions don't nurse their injured back to health. Wolves don't feed members of the pack who can no longer hunt. The resources don't exist, and the instinct doesn't either. But we did. We do. And the reason matters more than almost anything else in this story. Because the moment a human group decided that a sick or injured member was still worth keeping alive, something fundamental changed about what it meant to be human. Worth was no longer tied entirely to usefulness. A person didn't have to be able to hunt or carry or fight to deserve food and shelter and care. That idea, that a human life has value independent of what it can produce, is so embedded in us now that it feels obvious, natural, inevitable. It isn't. It was a choice, made for the first time by a small group of humans, crouching around someone on the ground who was burning with fever and shaking and couldn't get up. They didn't understand what was wrong. They didn't have the tools to fix it. They probably tried things that didn't work. They almost certainly lost people they couldn't save. But they stayed. They tried. They remembered what worked and passed it on. Every doctor who has ever lived is the descendant of that instinct. Every hospital is built on that choice. Every time someone sits with a sick person through the night, not because it's practical, not because there's anything left to do, but because leaving feels wrong, they are doing exactly what those first humans did. We didn't learn to care for the sick because someone told us to. We didn't develop medicine because a civilization decided it was a good policy. We did it because something in us, something old and stubborn and not entirely rational, refused to walk away. And that refusal is one of the oldest things about us.